Welcome to the Art Rebellion, a platform dedicated to activist art and pay and labor issues in the arts. My name is Makeda, and I'm here today with Wafa Ghnaim, a Palestinian American researcher, author, educator, and artist based in New York. Wafa is the founder of Tatreez Tea, which is a Palestinian-led educational arts initiative focused on the preservation, documentation, and research of textiles in the Southwest Asia and North Africa region. Thank you so much for making time to talk with me today, Wafa.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I wanted to start really broadly, and I was wondering if you could kind of talk about what Tatreez is and how you were introduced to the art form.
Yeah, tatreez is the Arabic word for the ornamentation of fabric. That's, from any region. It doesn't have to be Palestine. And it doesn't have to be cross stitch either. A lot of people use it today, including Palestinians, as this sort of term for cross stitch. But cross stitch is utbat al-fallahi, which is like the villager's stitch. Tatreez is kind of a more general term. And just really quickly about Tatreez Tea. Tatreez Tea originally was my book, my first book that I released, and the tea part of it was like spilling the tea in a sense, where it was like what was being shared, what was the storytelling that was a part of our embroidery traditions in historic Palestine.
And how were you introduced to the art form?
It's you're almost asking me a question similar to how did you learn how to use a spoon? It's something that has always been a part of my life. It was a sort of a skill that my mother started cultivating, and I expressed a lot of interest in me and my sisters at a very young age. I've always known embroidery in my life.
And can you talk about what you said Tattoos and Tea began as a book? What kind of led you to evolve into like an organization or an institute?
Yeah, it wasn't intentional, I would say. I think initially when I wrote the book, and for anyone who even reads it today, it isn't intended as necessarily an academic submission. It was meant to be a documentation of oral history, which today I argue is a form of academic source, a very valid one. And I wrote the book originally as a way of just kind of capturing all these stories and lessons that my mother taught me and my sisters when we were growing up. And to honor the work and contribution my mother gave in the United States teaching Palestinian embroidery in exile to Palestinians and non-Palestinians alike. When I released the book, I didn't imagine what would come next, but I started to be asked to kind of attend and to teach embroidery to different Palestinian groups, to different Palestinian communities around the United States. And then it started to grow into traveling the world. Ahead of the pandemic, I was traveling the world teaching Palestinian embroidery. I was the only instructor providing this at the time, or one of, there was very, very few. I think two other people started teaching before um, the pandemic. And so that's kind of where it all to a head. And then, of course, in the pandemic, I started teaching virtually and online, and then the community just rapidly grew. And that's where I started to sort of see myself teaching and educating and being this leader in educating in Palestinian embroidery, especially to the younger generation. But then I was looking for more research, and I was hungry for more research. And then that's kind of where my the development or the path of my career went towards research.
I was kind of struck by this line on your website. I'm going to pull it up. It says the Tatreez Institute is not a service to the culturally curious. It is an active agent in fighting for Palestinian liberation. And I was curious if you could kind of talk through what that means to you and why you have that on your site.
When you start teaching like a important cultural heritage practice in the United States or in any, predominantly kind of white area, right? Like in America specifically, there's already an cultural embroidery practice among, white Americans. And I started to become more and more of a resource in those circles to teach Palestinian embroidery. And at first, it was kind of a novelty of, well, this is wonderful. And, I can spread the word and I can get these people who probably watch the news and hear all kinds of things about Palestinians to stitch with me for a few hours and to learn about our people and to expand their ideas about who we are. I started to, I, I guess after that kind of period of novelty, the types of responses I received from some of those communities was that, they were threading their needle with me, but just because they wanted another pattern to stitch. It had nothing to do with raising their voice, and they had no interest in changing their mind. They just wanted to take these patterns to learn from me, to learn our history, and to walk away and either sell the embroidery that they make that has our motifs and appropriate our motifs, or otherwise. And this became really frightening for me. So I wanted to make it really clear where I stood. And often when you're in those kinds of circles where they're non-Palestinians, they're predominantly white, they start asking you kind of one-on-one. I started to get a lot of emails and one-on-one, correspondences where they were asking for my approval, that they produce our embroidery motifs that are specifically Palestinian and sell them for charity, or that they, all of these kinds of ideas that they had. They wanted to make our traditional dress and wear it. But I felt very uncomfortable about that. So I decided to make what you're reading from, which is the community guidelines, to make a really clear statement that I'm not interested in teaching people who are just culturally curious. I'm interested in activating people to educate others in their own communities, so that they can raise awareness about who we are as a people, and that we Palestinians also love life, and we also love art, and we also love culture, and we also produce beautiful things with our hands. And I don't want to be like tokenized or felt like I was potentially contributing to the erasure of my people.
And what does, I guess, solidarity in that way look like to you, especially if you're teaching a room full of white artists or non-Palestinian artists? What do you hope people, yeah, take from, your education, and how do they, yeah, what would you like to see ideally?
When you learn the arts, traditional arts of a people that are not your culture, and specifically, there's two other elements here. They're a people that are exiled under occupation and in refugee camps, and they are not allowed to fully experience life in their homeland. And you're residing and a citizen of a country that contributes to the killing of those people and the genocide of those people, the cultural erasure of those people, the dispossession of those people. You have a responsibility, and that responsibility is to educate yourself. Stitching is sometimes a way for our hands to learn and our mind to learn in a different way. So what I would want to see from those people is a high attention to historical detail and recall of that history, and stitching not as the main outcome that they're looking for in the community, but as a path of learning our history. It's an aid to learning our history, because some people are just very much that tactile, and they absorb information. Like, we have many non-Palestinians in the Tatreez Tea community that they learn better when they're stitching or when they're doing something with their hands. That's the kind of outcome that I'm looking for. And that when they present what they've stitched and learned from me, they don't strip it of its political and historical context, that they can stand up to criticism, not just from non-Palestinians who have these ideas about who we are, but to other Palestinians who are going to see their work being a white person or a non-Palestinian and are going to ask them, who are you to be stitching our motifs? Like, what do you think you're doing? That's not yours. They need to be strong enough to stand up and say, I learned from a Palestinian instructor that this means this and that means that, and it comes from this village, and I'm honoring your people. They need to be strong enough to do that. If they're not strong enough, I don't want to work with them. And I try to make that very clear. They have more work to do before they come to me. They're not ready for me yet. They can get ready for me when they're ready to heed that call to action and have those tough, uncomfy conversations. Then they're ready to talk to me and learn from me. But until then, they've got personal work in their allyship, their solidarity, their anti-racism work that they have to do.
Yeah, and kind of following that line of what you were just saying, can you kind of talk about your recent call to action with stitching the Palestinian resistance patterns? And yeah, what was there, a specific moment where you had the spark for this idea? And yeah, I'd love to hear more about it.
When everything happened on October 7th, and we were still kind of learning about what was unfolding and what it all meant. There was a moment of hope for us as Palestinians. It was met with a great deal of dread for what we knew would be coming in terms of violence towards our people and our children. But there was a glimmer of hope that maybe this military occupation of Israel and this sort of illusion of the wall, the apartheid wall, that it was all just theatrics of power, and that someone could bulldoze or fly in a parachute over the wall, like that there was a way to break out of this slaughterhouse that our people have been put in for over 56 years, but also 75 years since 1948. And in that sort of glimmer of hope, in knowing and dread of what was going to come next, I thought of what could potentially bring some sense of comfort to the Palestinian embroiderers in the community. Not comfort, but something. Give them something that they can do. Interestingly, at the very moment that I had that idea, our stitching collective community, we have like stitching circles every Thursday for Palestinians and Swana originating people, so like Syrian, Lebanese. Interestingly, I didn't attend that Thursday collective, but they had that same idea in their collective. And there was just this interesting, in the Tatreez Tea community, this interesting synergy that happened where we all thought, how can we capture and reflect our experience right now through our embroidery, like in tradition and in spirit of what Palestinian women did during the first Intifada, the second Intifada, the Oslo Accords, post 1948, post 1967 war, waves of our motifs came in, where we created motifs to reflect our current experience as Palestinians. And so this felt really exciting. And so a few folks in the community that I listed, Kat, Noor, Jay, and we put our minds together to create a few sets of patterns with watermelon, spoons, and handala on a parachute, as though like a child, like what if a child was on a parachute flying in the clouds of their own homeland? Is this the only way that they can see their homeland outside of this slaughterhouse concentration camp that they we're in. And so that's when those motifs and how those motifs came about. And I'm hoping that we can keep expanding this motifs. And the call to action, just to go back to your question more specifically, the call to action, yeah, it was to embroider so that we could all remember that we we I didn't want us to forget who we were as Palestinians. We are a people of creation. We are a people of love and life and arts and culture. And when it matters, we come together. And when it matters, we have a cellular level connection together as a whole around the world where we are yearning for similar things, and that we can be together even if we're not in the same place together.
And what's been the response to the call to action? Have you seen a lot of artists stitching these motifs, and what impact do you hope to have with artists coming together in this way?
I'm not sure how this is going to go. I really wanted to release the patterns, and me, Noor, Kat, and Jay, we really fully agreed that we didn't want these to be like Tatreez Tea patterns or our patterns that everyone had to tag me and credit. And I just wanted to give it to the community so that they could take a life of their own. And I was hoping, I don't know what I was hoping. I just wanted to, I had found myself online, unable to do anything else with my hands but to follow what was happening on the ground and to see all the ways that I could help and amplify Palestinian voices in Gaza. And my only goal in the call to action was, it was almost a call to action to self and a call to action to community, in a sense where we can remember that our hands were made for something more. And it feels, and that seems so, I guess, so simple to say, of course, everyone's hands are made for more. But when you're Palestinian in diaspora and you're bearing witness, which is a responsibility that we have as Palestinians, following Palestinians in Gaza and what's happening, to them and to our children there, we have a responsibility to bear witness. And at the same time, we also have responsibility to keep our culture alive. And so this was as far as I had thought, and I hadn't really calculated a greater plan. I had, fantasies about, maybe making a tapestry if people are stitching, and maybe later saying, hey, if anyone wants to send anything to us and we can build like a big tapestry. I don't know. But then that's so special. What a special piece for them to remember this moment. So I'm not sure yet what the outcome will be, except for that I hope that it was a call to action to self and a call to action for others, and to remember that we all came from a long lineage of activists. Like we talk about our ancestors and we talk about who came before us, but we don't talk a lot about all of the activists and the writers and the political theorists that were Palestinian that were assassinated over the last 75 years for speaking out. And I wanted to kind of contribute to this greater inheritance we have of activism in some way, through the arts.
And you mentioned before we started recording that you didn't really consider your work activism in that sense until really recently. I was wondering if, yeah, you could talk about that, and then also like the role that artists can play in the movement for Palestinian liberation.
I think that I'm not naive. I know that, being Palestinian in the United States, even saying that I'm Palestinian in this world is a rebellion, is a resistance. Existence is resistance. I know this. But at the end of the day, I'm just I'm just a girl who likes dresses. I like dresses. I like embroidery. I collect dresses. I like to research where dresses come from. I like to look at the embroidery and understand the patterns. I like to teach how to make those dresses for the cultural community in which it belongs. Had I been any other person of any other culture, I don't know, maybe I don't know who's to say, but I feel I will always be this. I've always been this way. And making has been a big part of my life and sort of just healing and growing in my life, and I wanted to use it as a way to heal and grow for others, like to kind of share it as a tool for them as well. And so the fact that it's all because I'm Palestinian that makes this an activism, it's just a funny thought to me that would I be considered an activist if I was of any other culture? And of course I'm an activist, of course, I believe in our humanity. I believe that for freedom and liberation for my people. There's no question about it, but it's just a funny thought to me that my work archiving our cultural heritage is activism. And I think that idea is worth us thinking about and considering, and what that means. Would that be the way we would categorize this work for other cultures? And can we get to a place where when Palestinians are free, that I'm just simply the girl who likes dresses, the lady who likes dresses and who likes to talk about dresses and who lives in her dresses and wants to bring people to touch the dresses and wear the dresses and talk about our history. I don't know. That's kind of the thought I had when you were asking me earlier.
Yeah, and then what role do you think artists can play in the movement for Palestinian liberation?
I think artists have so much agency in visual language. And we talk a lot about like amplifying Palestinian voices. We're not just talking about the actual voice of what you hear. When we say amplify Palestinian voices, we're saying all the ways that our voices emerge through literature, literary arts, visual arts, performance arts, musical arts, all of these kinds of ways. And so I think that artists have a really unique position, Palestinian artists specifically, but also any artist, to use their visual language that's within their toolbox or of what they do to amplify Palestinian voices and to express Palestinian culture in some way, or identity, Palestinian identity in some way. And I'm not sure that I have a specific thing that they can do, but that, we've seen, painters and sculptors and mural artists and even, Free Gaza Circus or that is online, like doing dancing and showing children in the schools right now in Gaza ways to express themselves right now amidst all the fear and trauma, and using all of these kinds of avenues of expression is what artistry is about. And so I'm not sure if I have anything more specific than that to say. I think that's
Great. Yeah. This question's a little bit different from some of my other questions, but I think we're seeing in real time how important like words are and like media, like representation of what's happening. And so I've seen, just descriptions of the conflict in Palestine and just so many different like ways to describe what's happening, like Israel, Gaza war, um, Israel, Hamas, and genocide, Gaza genocide. I'm wondering like how you are describing, or like how would you describe the situation right now? What words are you using?
I call it a genocide. I also believe ethnic cleansing, forcible expulsion. These are all, I think, accepted terms. I try to, as useless as the United Nations has become and has presented itself to be in all of this. I still think some of the language that they've used has been really helpful for me in my work and more conservative places to where I can sort of express myself. But also, I mean, absolutely, I believe what's happening right now is genocide. We have a concentration camp of 2.3 million people, half are children, and most of them are refugees. They're people that don't have much and have barely rebuilt their lives, and that are not armed in order to defend themselves in any sort of a way. I think largely, I 100% agree with the terminology that it is a genocide. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what can people do to support your work, or what kind of support would you like to see?
I don't, I don't, I'm not sure I want any support necessarily. I don't know how to answer that. I feel like right now, all we can do, in order for Palestinian embroidery to stay alive, we need Palestinians to stay alive. That's what is needed in order to keep Palestinian embroidery alive. And so calling for a ceasefire, calling reps, faxing reps, emailing reps, whatever we can do, joining protests, raising our voices. This is ultimately what our power is to do at a moment like this, and to be very unrelenting and persistent, I think is very needed at this moment, to not focus so much on the time will come when donating our money, donating to charities is going to be very, very important, and we're going to have to really work towards that. But right now, money is useless in Gaza if the violence doesn't stop, if there's no ceasefire. So I'm not sure that I necessarily need any support for my work. If people want to, in their own activism and commitment to elevating Palestinian voices right now in Gaza, want to engage on Gaza every once in a while in a different way, in a more humanizing light, through learning about the dresses and the art, they're welcome in my community. They're welcome to my Instagram account to have just a moment of just that humanity, so they can see and be reminded of the people that created this art and our culture. And I know that that can be very energizing and rejuvenating to continue our fight forward. Then that's all that I can ask. I think there's not much I think I can ask right now, and I don't want to. I want all the focus to stay on Gaza.
Yeah, those were the main questions I had. Was there anything else that you would like to add that I didn't ask about?
I think that some of my work I'm going to mention is in stewarding dresses, Palestinian dresses in particular, from Americans in the United States that are not Palestinian people who have purchased our dresses, especially old ones, through their Holy Land trips to Palestine. And I just want their call to action is to find a way to return those dresses to our community. I can steward those dresses to other cultural institutions or for my own educational research, but I want to call on all those non-Palestinians in the United States, even Canada, who have our dresses and don't know what to do with them, that now might be a really great time to return them to us. And we appreciate their stewardship of caring for those dresses, but they need to return them to our culture. We need to be able to access those dresses and learn about our history through those dresses.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. And thank you so much for all your work and for making time today. This was a really great conversation, so I appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you.